All right, Counselor Hill, would you read us out of closed session, please?
Yes, with the city council certified by recorded vote to the best of each council member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion convening the closed session were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session.
Is there a second?
A second.
Ms. Thomas?
Councilor Payne,
Yes.
Councilor Snook,
Yes.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Vice Mayor McGill,
Yes.
Councilor Hill,
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I call this meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, would you do a roll call, please?
Councilor Payne,
Present.
Councilor Snook,
Here.
Mayor Walker,
Present.
Vice Mayor McGill,
Here.
Councilor Hill,
Here.
Did you respond? I didn't hear you. Okay,
Oh, sorry, here.
all right, thank you. And we'll have a moment of silence before we get started. All right, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Roll call, please, Ms. Thomas.
Councilor Payne,
Yes.
Councilor Snook,
Yes.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Vice Mayor McGill,
Yes.
Councilor Hill,
Yes.
Okay, are there any announcements? Oh, and that carries 5-0. Sorry about that. Any announcements?
Mayor Walker, I would like to remind the public to be aware of the governor's new ordinances that came in, and that people make sure that they check up on that with limiting space groups of people to 25 or less, masking requirements. And so to please make sure you're making yourself aware that things did change Sunday night.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Ms. Thomas, would you read the consent agenda, please?
Appropriation, Virginia Department of Education Special Nutrition Program Child and Adult Care Food Program, $30,000, second reading. Appropriation, Virginia Outdoors Foundation Grant, Ragged Mountain Land Acquisition, $65,000, second reading. Appropriation, Runaway Emergency Shelter Program Grant, $209,444, second reading. Appropriation, Local Emergency Management Performance Grant, $7,500, second reading. Ordinance, amendment to the text of Chapter 34 zoning ordinance of the City of Charlottesville, 1990, as amended to provide updates to family day home uses, second reading.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wheeler, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on a matter on the consent agenda?
If you're joining us on the Zoom webinar and you'd like to give council feedback on one of those items on the consent agenda, click the raise hand icon, or if you're on via telephone, press *9. Mayor Walker, there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion?
I move we adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, any further question or comments? No, okay, and my only comment is for number 5, the ordinance. I 100% agree with it outside of the fact that it's being changed due to COVID. I was told yesterday during my Facebook Live, that there was a comment made about moral leadership. But I think it's just very important for us to understand that if these daycare providers come to us in the future and need some assistance, wraparound holistic services, because they don't have insurance, or because they lose income because they get sick, none of which is covered by us increasing this. And every time we deem someone as essential, just understanding that they are that they are being put at risk. So that's my thought with this ordinance change. Are there any other comments? All right, Ms. Thomas, would you call for a vote, please?
Counselor Payne,
Yes.
Counselor Snook,
Yes.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Vice Mayor McGill,
Yes.
Counselor Hill,
Yes.
All right, thank you. That carries 5-0. Next up, we have the city manager's response to community matters from the November 2nd meeting. Mr. Blair.
Mayor Walker and councilors, a few matters to go over tonight. At the last meeting, there was a question about Chief Brackney's meeting with Ms. Rose. I did talk to Chief Brackney. She had a meeting with Ms. Rose and I believe Mayor Walker on October 29th. And she had an additional meeting with Ms. Rose on November the 2nd. There was also a question about the council restarting in-person meetings. Both the Charlottesville and Albemarle school boards are not performing in-person meetings now, and so far they don't have anything. They haven't particularly talked about, I think, when they plan to restart. The Albemarle County Board of Supervisors has talked about revisiting the issue in January of 2021. But I think as people understand right now with case counts nationwide rising, certainly that's at the council's discretion. I want to point that out when you want to consider meeting in person again, but just wanted to give you that bit of info. Couple other items. Vice Mayor McGill at the beginning of the meeting mentioned the COVID executive order from the governor. It is my hope that either on Friday or at your December 7th meeting, we can have your previously adopted COVID ordinance before you to come into compliance with the governor's executive order. The main difference being that when you all took action back on July 27th of this year, you had a 50-person limit to gatherings, and that was more restrictive than the state. But the governor on Friday evening has now lowered that to 25. And so we are going to need to change the ordinance to put it in compliance with the executive order. But it is important to note that the executive order takes precedence over our local ordinance. So for any of the public listening, the governor's executive order is now what applies to in-person gatherings. And the governor set that limit at 25, which is more restrictive than the local ordinance. So again, the governor's order controls in this matter. The other thing I wanted to let folks know is that tomorrow at 10 a.m. you can register via Zoom. There's going to be a site plan conference, and that is concerning a site plan at 200 Carlton Avenue. And just wanted to, again, let the public know about that. Thank you.
And I'll just add I think another part of the citizens' comments regarding the 2020 meeting was about staff safety. And if staff are in the buildings working, that, we can have in-person meetings. And I just want to say that I think that it's, and hopefully, it's being done. But it's going to be very critical, especially as numbers rise, for us to make sure that we are rotating staff out. And, this is a conversation that I had a lot with the, previous city manager about, not having the entire departments, on hand. There was a good example of this recently at one of the, I think the pediatric ICU clinic at UVA, where there was 170 people potentially exposed to COVID. And because they all work in that unit, they all have to continue working, or that was the decision made. And just being more hopeful than actually knowing the outcome of that. So hopefully that we are taking heed to, situations like that occurring, and making sure that we don't put our staff in that, those predicaments, and understanding from a citizen perspective that may mean that certain services, and especially, when, people cannot work, do the teleworking, that means that there may be a slower response to service, and just that, we get that message out to the community. And hopefully they'll understand, but if not, we should just make the employee safety the number one priority. And we had just had a conversation, bars were included in the governor's the limitation, and we had just had that conversation. And of course, I'll say the same thing I said about 50, that about 25, that you all have, had colds, flu, and you don't know where you got it from. So I'm sure that people can contract COVID with 25 people in the room. And I just hope that we are paying attention, that sometimes we may have to push, at the state level a little bit harder, and our regional partners and ourselves on, more restrictive measures when it comes to this virus, because it's taken them quite a long time to get around to it. And I know there was this amazing article about, again, Charlottesville rates and how well that they were doing, but I just hope we know what kind of, signal that sends, sometimes to the community. We also know that the testing capacity may not tell the full story, and we always have to be aware of that, not just on whether people have received a test the first time, but some people may think that because they received a test, that means that they may not be positive. And there are the false positives, and there's also, you can have a test on Wednesday, have an exposure Wednesday night, and need another test. And I don't think that we made that clear. And so those were my only 2 points. So thank you, Mr. Blair. Counselors, are there any comments? Oh, all right. Next up, we're at the Community Matters. Mr. Wheeler, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Walker. We did have 6 people sign up in advance to address council during Community Matters. I only see 3 of them on the webinar at the moment, so I will call out their names, but if they're not present, we'll come back to them and see if they join us later. Council will hear from up to 16 people for 3 minutes each. And if you would, tell us your place of residence when you introduce yourself to council. The first person who signed up to speak in advance was John Hall. And again, I do not see John Hall in the webinar at the moment, so we will come back to him. Next person who signed up in advance is Mary Cherie Lewis. I do not see her on the webinar. Next person who signed up in advance is Deborah Lawrence. Deborah, you're on the City Council. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Deborah Lawrence. I live at 525 Grove Avenue here in Charlottesville, and I'm an environmental scientist at the University of Virginia. I have been teaching an introductory class on climate change to 300 students a year for the past 7 years. Each time I teach it, I learn more about the devastating impacts of climate change that we're already facing. I learn how it disproportionately impacts the poor and people of color, and how those impacts will grow and get worse the longer we wait. But every time I teach it, I also get more hopeful about stopping climate change. We have the tools we need, from new energy technologies to policies and ideas that can be implemented by a city like Charlottesville. Please make climate change central to all you do on council. Every budget decision, every major plan. Climate affects everything: the cost of our food, of heating and cooling our homes, of getting to work and staying healthy. Make a bold climate action plan and put climate into the strategic plan. Thank you for working with Albemarle County and the University of Virginia to set bold targets. Keep working with them to lower our emissions, especially from transportation. I urge you to join other municipalities in the Commonwealth to advance climate policies that you need at the state level in order to be effective at the local level. Engage us, your citizens, to advocate for our city. Tell us what you need us to say to our legislators. We can't wait for federal action. Please take action in Charlottesville, here and now, so we can have a better future. That future depends on addressing climate change now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, the next person who signed up in advance is Myra Anderson, and I've received information that she will not be able to attend tonight. I will keep an eye on the webinar to see if she joins us. The next two people will be Peter Krebs, followed by Susan Cruz. And if you'd like to get in line to speak, just click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar, or press *9 if you're on via telephone. So next up will be Peter Krebs. Peter, you're on with council. Can you hear us?
Yes, good evening. I'm Peter Krebs from the Piedmont Environmental Council. I live on Tufton Avenue in the city. We are going to hear tonight about the streets of Charlottesville and how they can be safer. I will be especially interested in the report about Fifth Street and why it is so unacceptably deadly. Make no mistake, it is unacceptable. Imagine if a water pipe or some other piece of infrastructure took half a dozen lives every year. I don't think you would allow that to continue, nor should we. I'm not singling out Charlottesville. We see a very similar pattern all across the country. Certain streets, often dating from the era of urban renewal, are designed for high speeds and bisect low wealth communities. Does this sound familiar? If we want to save lives and have any hope of stitching those communities back together, we need to slow the vehicles down. Lowering the speed limit may help, but only if people honor that. And anyway, I'm not sure we want to increase interaction with law enforcement. If we do, it should only be for purposes of education. Better to modify behaviors by changing the road design back to something more human scale. There are long-term changes that are proven to reduce fatalities and quicker interventions that can help while we wait. All of them will require trade-offs, but I would place the highest priority on human life, which is irreplaceable. As a matter of policy, let's make this our goal: 0 fatalities or serious injuries on city streets. It is attainable. Other cities are doing it. Let's commit to fund proper infrastructure at a level that reflects the seriousness of the enterprise, and it's one that only the government can execute. Let's encourage and empower staff to try new things. Coincidentally, PEC is holding a free virtual event with Safe Streets author and advocate Angie Schmidt on Monday, November 30th at 5 p.m. She will talk about national trends, but they will feel very familiar to our local situation. Details can be found at pecva.org. I look forward to seeing many of you there and also to tonight's presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Willow, I'm on my phone tonight, so I can't see the timer, and I thought I had pressed it, but I didn't. So I just want to make sure I know where he stopped at.
You know, I've already reset it,
Okay.
but he had not run out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I can, do you want me to draw attention to the buzzer?
I will set the timer moving forward. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Next up will be Susan Cruz. Again, I'll check back on some of the other people who signed up in advance. If they don't show up after Susan, will be Tanisha Hudson, followed by Andy Orban. Susan, you're on the City Council. Can you hear us?
Am I coming through?
You are. Go ahead.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Walker, Vice Mayor McGill, and Charlottesville City Council. My name is Susan Cruz, and I am the Executive Director of the Community Climate Collaborative, or C3. I wanted to begin my remarks tonight by sharing with you the network that C3 has been building for the past 2 years. In this time, we have worked with more than 400 households, more than 100 businesses, and dozens of nonprofit organizations to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. When the city was setting its greenhouse gas reduction goal, we brought you letters signed by 1,000 residents, 43 businesses, and 9 social justice organizations, all asking for leadership and an equity focus on climate planning. This is a network of informed and committed community members ready to do their part to help Charlottesville lead on climate. Now, nearly 17 months after setting its climate goal, the city is engaging in not only 1, but 3 processes that will impact its ability to reach these goals: comprehensive planning, strategic planning, and climate action planning, which I hope will begin soon. Comprehensive planning and strategic plans will take us just 5 years away from our climate goal. It's certainly challenging, I will tell you, for residents to engage meaningfully in all 3 of these processes simultaneously. So we are counting on you to ensure that climate is emphasized in these plans. C3 has reviewed the current draft of the comprehensive plan. Affordable housing, food justice, and transportation equity are all important factors in climate leadership, and we applaud the sections of the comprehensive plan, these sections of the comprehensive plan. That being said, the current comprehensive plan draft falls short on climate leadership. To begin with, climate action needs to be included in the description of the guiding principles. While climate leadership is mentioned in the title, the current draft seems to avoid the mention of climate change, rather talking about environmental footprints and clean air and water as if they are taboo. We need to be willing to name the challenge we are facing head on, and so we can meet them head on with eyes wide open. When the city's greenhouse gas reduction goals are mentioned in reference to our environmental footprint, the draft currently states that Charlottesville will make steady progress toward these goals. Steady progress is not what climate leadership looks like. We need to make ambitious progress to show other localities that progress is possible. C3 is submitting these and other comments to the comprehensive planning team. These plans will last for 5 years. Please, let's not let the more than 1,000 residents down who are asking you to lead. It's time for Charlottesville to get serious about climate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, next up is Tanisha Hudson. Tanisha, you're on with City Council. You've got 3 minutes.
I just wanted to speak on a few things. First and foremost, I would like to correct something that was discussed on the mayor's live last night about Fifth Street. There were conversations happening about Fifth Street well before some of these most recent accidents even happened. And some of the suggestions were either a red light at Bailey Road or a roundabout. So the conversations were happening long before. She doesn't like to give any credit to Dr. Richardson and his relationship that he had with people in the community, but I know several people who wrecked on Fifth Street that met with him, that talked about things that needed to be done on Fifth Street, and he gave some suggestions. So whether council worked with him on that or not, I don't know. I also wanted to point out that she said something about accountability and being consistent. You also said, Mayor, that sometimes change is like multiple pieces of puzzles, trying to make a picture with different pieces of puzzles. Well, let me go ahead and just give you my version of your little analogy you tried to use. You are the only piece of the puzzle, you and a couple other people on council, that don't want to work with people. When it don't go y'all way, y'all have a way in making people do what y'all want them to do. I just got a FOIA today, $424. And you and Heather Hill going back and forth discussing Dr. Richardson. Now, if NBC 29 and the Daily Progress and Seaville Weekly or Charlottesville Tomorrow wrote stories correctly here in Charlottesville, then they would be able to point out the manipulative BS that you guys are doing. And then the other three leaders are just so weak that they don't say anything. I mean, look at John Blair. He looked like he ain't even getting no sleep. Y'all probably running circles around him. He's a nice man. He's not gonna say no. He gonna do whatever it is just because. That's just him. That's his personality. But y'all are like, I mean, Trumpism is right here in Charlottesville. And the audacity of a Black woman to be doing it. And then you act like you so conscious. You so conscious. But you ran for office in a system that has held us in bondage forever. But you so conscious. You the only one that's amazing at your job. And nobody else is amazing at what they do. Nobody else. But y'all have these secret messages. You act like this stuff can't be FOIA. Y'all sending emojis to each other. Y'all asking what should be in this work plan for the city manager. Like, yo, why don't y'all take accountability that y'all just didn't fit with that man puzzle piece? Why don't y'all take accountability for that? Just admit it, but you won't. You would not do that.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson. I will add that it's, again, I have been doing FOIAs for years before I arrived at the city in this capacity, a lot of years. And so I'm very aware that whatever I put in writing can be FOIA'd. And there is nothing that I have put in writing that I didn't expect that someone would read at some point.
Thank you, Mayor Walker. Next up is Andy Orban. Andy, you're on the City Council and you've got 3 minutes.
I'm Andy Orban. Y'all can hear me?
Yep.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor Walker, councilors, Mr. Blair. I'm very happy to see that the traffic safety is on the agenda, and I'd like to comment specifically regarding the 5th Street extended corridor. So this deadly stretch of road is past due for study and solutions. And while I agree that the speed limit should be lowered and the intersections improved, there is a significant aspect of the road design that must also be addressed. The current 4 lanes should be reduced to 2. A single lane each way from Cherry to Harris would make the road much safer for all users. Currently, the road is far too dangerous to use for people on bikes and those walking along the road. When cars speeding in excess of 40, 50 miles an hour, zooming along with, the sidewalk right there, just the slightest distraction, can take out a life along the road as well. Not to mention the high speeds that have led to car crashes. So what I would like to see along the road is to have each lane, one lane each way, converted into a protected bike lane. This would serve to buffer and protect the movement of people outside of cars, and would make this drag strip-like section of road safe for people in cars as well. I know there are concerns about congestion if we reduce lanes, but this change can be done as a temporary study to see the effects, and we may find that the reduction in speeds and increased safety for biking and walking would be of greater benefit for everyone using the Fifth Street Extended road. Please consider this design option as you continue to study the safety improvements for this road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, next up is Kristen Lucas. Kristen, you're on with City Council. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Awesome. Cool. So my name is Kristen Lucas. I live at 1053 5th Street Southwest. That's sandwiched between Bailey and Cleveland. And I'm here talking about the traffic study as well. I walk on 5th Street almost every day. I bike to work sometimes on 5th Street. And I walked out my door when there was a crash and someone had passed away on 5th Street. And I strongly support changes to 5th Street to make it not only safer for drivers, but also for pedestrians and bikers and those that are living on this road and are concerned that you might be rear-ended or maybe hit by a car while you are just going about your daily life on this stretch of street. So please consider, better bike lanes, more lighting, roundabouts, traffic lights, better street design, not just lowering the speed limit to 40 miles per hour, but all of those things to make the streets safer, not only for cars, but also for the people living and working and walking in this area. Thanks.
Thank you. Our seventh speaker will be Rory Stolzenberg, who will be followed by Joan Albiston and then Robin Hoffman. Rory, you're on with City Council. You've got 3 minutes.
Thanks, Brian, and good evening, Council and Mayor Walker. Thank you last week for the discussion on Tuesday, a thoughtful discussion about the parking garage. I'll be reaching out to you with some more on that soon. That's not what I'm here to talk to you about, which I'm sure you're relieved by. But I would recommend, if you don't want to hear from me, I know John Sales has reached out to some of you, and I urge you to reach back out to him and talk to him. But instead, what I'd like to talk about tonight is one of your reports from today. And in particular, for the third budget season in a row, I'd like to talk about the parking fund. You heard today that the parking fund's transfers to the general fund will be reduced by $500,000 because of reduced revenue. And that's part of a general strategy to, quote, wean the general fund off of the parking revenues. In effect, to make the parking fund what they call self-sufficient, but really means that all of the money it earns in profit just stay within the fund. But the problem is that staff has never articulated what the parking fund is for. In its original envisioning, it was thought that maybe it would contribute to a transportation demand management plan that could help fund multimodal improvements and sidewalks, or even, I know this sounds ridiculous, but parking. But we know that the parking fund is not going to fund the parking in the garage that we're building and spending a lot of money on and debating. So what does it go to? And in lieu of an answer to that, I would ask you to consider what to do with that $2.5 million plus that's sitting in that account that has no apparent purpose. Thank you, and have a great night, Council.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, next up is Joan Albiston, who will be followed by Robin Hoffman and then Joanne Robertson. Joan, you're on the City Council. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I
Yeah.
assume you can hear me as well.
We can, go ahead.
Great. My name is Joan Albiston. I live in Willoughby, 921 Royer Drive. I own property in the city as well in Fry Springs. And I have read the traffic engineer's report for Fifth Street. And I would like to thank them for their recommendations to make Fifth Street safer. In particular, I'd like to thank them for recommending a flashing yellow arrow in place of a green light. They don't specify at Harris and Fifth Street which travelways would be affected by that flashing light. And I'm hoping that they would be installed for at least the eastbound Harris Road travelway. I also would like to ask, they don't mention in the report whether the sight triangles at Fifth Street and Harris were reviewed, and if so, if they were found adequate. In my experience leaving Willoughby, and as a landscape architect who has some experience with sight triangles, I'm not sure that they are adequate for the speed of that road. I know that there were garden plots last week in Willoughby that were mowed down by the Virginia Department of Transportation, and I'm assuming that was for sight triangles. And so I just wanted to check to make sure that that was part of the solution as well. I think that the reduction in speed limit approaching the Fifth Street Harris intersection should help drivers to see oncoming vehicles barreling through Fifth Street and can defensively maneuver. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, our ninth speaker will be Joanne Robertson. Joanne, you're on with council. Can you hear us?
Hi, thank you for allowing me this time. I just wanted to give some major kudos out to Melissa Morton and the amazing job that she did over the voter registration and all the amazing planning that she did and the team. I know there were times where the line was wrapping all the way out to Market Street, down Market Street. So good job there. I also wanted to say about Dr. Richardson. Dr. Richardson really helped people in the community. In fact, he was one of the only city employees that went out to visit elderly and disabled people to see how they were doing. And one of the things that he said when he first came here was he was eager to work with the community. And as a community activist, that's one thing that he did. So whoever comes in after John Blair as permanent city manager has some big shoes to fill. Another thing that I wanted to mention on talking about police and in Charlottesville, and I keep hearing defund the police or people do not necessarily mean defund the police. We want to see police do different things. For example, elderly and disabled people in Charlottesville should know who is an officer that maybe they can reach out to that's on that beat. I don't know if that's what meaning in that community or in that area. So those are three things that I wanted to point out. And I think Charlottesville addresses the issue that you have police officers that are totally unconnected from their community. People are not going to feel safe. They're not going to feel like someone really cares unless you get that community connection. So I think that's one thing that we're missing. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, our 10th speaker will be Robin Hoffman. If you'd like to get in line after Robin, just click the raise hand icon. The council has room for another 6 speakers. Robin, you're on the city council. Can you hear us?
Yes, hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm calling because, I'm talking because there was a news event today on Channel 29 about air quality indoors. And they are doing some studies, and in fact, the air purifiers are working, but it's not pulling out the air at this point as fast or as depending on how many people are there who have COVID and that sort of thing. So I think they're still looking at that. And then also Data Palooza at UVA, I attended that Zoom. They were talking also about the different types of technology and also the occurrence of poverty and things that are going on. I was wondering if you guys could, and by the way, I want to say also, I appreciate, because I'm on all these Zoom meetings and conferences around the world as well, that your leadership is really cool. I'm glad, I personally am very glad that you represent Charlottesville, and hopefully we get some more intel about how people can get monies to keep going for the next year until hopefully the immunizations work. But we need to have more leadership, I think, talking to the governor about people being unemployed and really hungry and also lonely. So, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, I've checked again for the 3 people who signed up in advance. I don't see them in the webinar, and there are no other hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, so we'll just continue since it's not time yet. So the first action item is an allocation for the employee assistance proposal. And we have one reading, and Mr. Cullinan is going to present.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Actually, I'm going to defer to Ms. Dimick to take the lead on this item.
Good evening, everyone. This item is in direct response to concerns expressed by City Council at the last meeting and at a special meeting, I believe, in between, about the status of the employees that were subject to a reduction in force as a result of the COVID pandemic. I believe there are 228 individuals who were laid off for lack of work during this reduction in force, and so this is a request to allocate $100,000 in what remains in the COVID contingency fund to provide support to the neediest of the 228 employees. We propose that Human Resources, upon your approval, will send a notice to those affected employees, letting them know that this money is available to them. We designate one individual in the Department of Human Services to receive their calls to try to prevent or try to preserve confidentiality, and that those employees who have area median incomes of 50% will receive up to $750, and those with area median incomes of less than 30% would receive up to $1,000. And if there are additional funds left over between now and December 30th, we might be able to provide a second round, but I think that's about the right amount of money for the number of folks who are affected. There have been questions about finding ways to support those employees who had reduction in hours but did not lose their employment status with the city. And so staff are working on other ways that we can possibly support those employees, in addition to all employees in the city who may have retained their employment but maybe still be struggling in the current economy and situation. I'm happy to answer questions.
When you have been kind of fielding questions, requests from the broader community over the course of the last 8 months, can you give a sense in terms of this, just the scope of some of that need for people who found themselves in the circumstances that we're seeing some of our employees are in now, but maybe they were there 6 months ago? Do you have a sense for just kind of the rough kind of range of dollar amounts for requests and what that actually is going to allow them, how they're being applied for, just kind of more frequent things that those things are being used for? I'm just trying to get a sense for how we can get a sense for what we've already seen as a city with the requests coming in from the more general population versus what we might be seeing from our employees.
I should note that employees, regardless of whether they receive these funds or not, would always remain eligible for any assistance through the Pathways Fund or even through the state's rent and mortgage relief program. And we have seen requests come for as little as $300 to do a critical repair of a car, to as much as $7,500 for arrears for someone facing eviction. And so we've had a pretty wide range of kinds of requests. We have split the requests around rental assistance at about $1,000. So anything less than $1,000 can be accesses the sort of local pathways fund. Anything more than $1,000, we've been referring to the state funds. It looks like the state has agreed has found and agreed to continue to provide support for the rent and mortgage relief fund through next year. And they believe they have sufficient funds to meet the entire need for the state for rental assistance based on their eligibility requirements through 2021, which is pretty astonishing, and a great deal of relief for the rest of us who are scrambling to try to provide services. In addition, we've heard that there's a significant tranche of money coming for utility assistance as well. And so that would leave the sort of local dollars, particularly starting in January, to fill in the gaps for these sort of major state initiatives. And then we might get a better sense of what people need. So I think $1,000 is certainly helpful. It is symbolic. It is, it's not addressing someone's poverty concern. It might be very critical for that month, but it's certainly not a sufficient amount of money to address someone's ongoing concern. And so that's a fair consideration.
Thank you.
And I would just like to say, I know that we're working on limited funding, but the reduction in hours is significant. There are, people who could have been working full-time hours before that are just able to get just whatever the city has available for them, at this time, which a few weeks ago, that was, 5 hours a week for some people. So I just think that if while we are considering this, and we may think because they may still be on payroll, which it appeared, since we didn't get any clear information about how that decision was made, it was more for the city benefit, for them to be able to work when needed versus really the staff benefit. And so I just want to make sure that council, you are again aware of how significant when you're talking about a reduction in hours and what that would mean for the employees that we're talking about. That is pretty significant. It's not just a few hours.
It's certainly a possibility that as we begin to assess the use of the CARES money that's already been allocated, that we consider this in mid-December as an opportunity to use any unspent funds, whether left in the contingency fund or returned to the city. In addition, there have been proposals internally around the sort of creation of a shared pool for sick leave or for vacation leave that would help many of these employees, and also the possibility of no interest loans and small grants for employees. None of those things are in place right now, but I think that this is the right time for us to revisit some of those proposals as a way to support existing employees, whether they have reduced hours or are just struggling in the economy like many, many others.
I want to thank you very much, Kaki. I know you and I talk some back and forth about some ideas as well. And I just, the creativity and the ingenuity you and your staff and others have shown throughout this pandemic and trying to meet people's needs, I really appreciate. And I know it's cost you a lot of sleepless nights because I know you and everybody else this means a great deal to you. And I just want you to know it's appreciated and known.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions?
So at this point, we'll allocate this fund amount, and then in December, we will be revisiting other opportunities to supplement that. And there should still be enough time in order to exercise those dollars since they're going to intern or people that we have contact information.
Exactly. That would be a fairly straightforward process. Should we get to that place, we could do that pretty quickly.
Thank you.
All right, so Ms. Thomas, could you call to vote, please?
I think I have to make a motion or somebody does.
Oh, yeah.
I move that we recommend approval using the remaining CARES contingency reserve funds in the amount of $100,000 to provide financial assistance to city employees laid off during the reduction of force made necessary by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
Awesome.
Oh, one of us will.
Counselor Payne,
Yes.
Counselor Snook,
Yes.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Vice Mayor McGill,
Yes.
Counselor Hill.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That carries 5-0. And just the comment that I have is just for us to be really aware of that these are the lowest paid employees in the organization. And that even though they were considered temporary, they worked weekly hours, regularly scheduled, and that the reduction in hours for the people who are still on payroll, because we never got clear answers about that, is pretty significant, and that we need to be reaching out to them in the same way. All right. So I think that we should probably take a break now because I don't know how lengthy this discussion for this topic is going to be. Is there anyone who's opposed to that? No? Okay. So we can take a 15-minute break and we will return then.
Sounds good.
All right. All right, are we good to go? Mr. Willer, can you hear me?
We are. Mayor Walker, it looks like everyone's back.
All right, thank you. So next up, we have a report, traffic safety report, and Mr. Duncan, one of the city traffic engineers, will present.
Thank you, Mayor Walker, city councilors. I'm just going to go sans camera since I was having some connection issues the last meeting. So Brian is going to pull up a presentation here. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Brian. So there were a few community traffic concerns that have come to council and city managers, traffic engineering over the summer. Cherry Avenue, Willard Drive, and 5th Street corridor. I think most of this discussion will be 5th Street, but we'll go ahead and start with the other two. So Cherry Avenue, there is a petition submitted to council on July 24th, mostly relating to the 35-mile-an-hour posted speed limit. The petition itself really didn't meet kind of the criteria that the city would normally have to start a traffic study for this, but we already had one scheduled as part of the Cherry Avenue small area plan. It had been on the books since, just before COVID hit, and once COVID did hit and traffic patterns changed, we kind of put it on the back burner waiting for traffic patterns to return to normal. They've mostly come back, so we went ahead and had scheduled it. We just got the traffic numbers from the consultant we hired to do the counts on Friday. So we will be putting together kind of a final report for that. Some of the preliminary findings, just in looking over the numbers, where the traffic today does not travel even at the posted speed limit. So there probably will be some sort of reduction in the speed limit there, but we need to finish going through all those numbers before we can really present what our recommendation would be for the corridor. And I anticipate that, over the holidays and stuff, we'll put that together and come back to council with that finalized report in January. Next. The next one was Willard Drive. This was a citizen comment. It's been talked about at the Fry Spring Neighborhood Association. There's been a lot of talk about this one. The original letter really spoke to, vegetation, overgrowth of signage, the location of signage, a lot of truck traffic using Willard Drive as a cut through, noise generated by the speed bumps. So those are all kind of the concerns that were brought forward. Next slide. For the most part, all of the signage and vegetation concerns have been taken care of. We've cleared off the signs, and we've added some speed signs, moved some speed signs. We are still planning to install no through truck traffic further out at the main roads as they kind of come up to Willard Drive to try and cut down on that. That won't reduce or remove all truck traffic, but hopefully it will, give trucks advance warning that, they shouldn't be using that. The speed humps themselves were done as part of the traffic calming handbook process that was, it was one of the first ones in the city that was done to my knowledge. Looking back through the records, it was done in 2008 and the traffic calming handbook was done in 2008. There was no, at that time when the traffic calming handbook was put in, I don't think there was much thought put into, what happens down the road if people want to remove those traffic calming measures. So what we're kind of recommending is, an update amendment to the traffic calming handbook that would basically lay out the same process that we use to install traffic calming, but to relook at it, we would put a caveat on there that we would only do that after said features have been in service for at least 10 years. And that's just to give traffic a chance to acclimate to the measures, traffic patterns to equalize, people to get used to it. But over time, traffic patterns do change, new developments go in. So we do think that it's appropriate to have, something in there to remedy that. So Fifth Street, a big one. So Fifth Street corridor safety. It's been a big public concern over vehicle speeds on the corridor. We have had 5 fatal accidents in the last 4 years. And then just overall corridor safety as well. Next slide. So Charlottesville Police Department, we've been looking at this. Charlottesville Police Department has actually had their smart radar machines out there twice over the last 18 months, getting vehicle speeds and data for us to look at. Both times that those were put out there, the results were extremely similar, even with it being, in COVID for this last one. But, the average speed on the corridor is between 42 and 44 miles an hour. 85th percentile, which is a, traffic engineering term, but basically it's, 85% of people are going less than 5 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. We will always have outliers that are well exceeding that, but based on those numbers, it's my assertion that there's really not a speeding problem with the posted speed limit of 45. But I had said in my report to council, we do have a corridor that allows for higher speeds for those that do want to break the speed limit. The safety and the fatalities that have happened, they are unfortunate, but in looking at the vehicle crash reports that were provided by Charlottesville Police Department, none of them were attributed to the roadway design, and they were all, contributed to driver behavior. There's a few things that as traffic engineers we really can't design for. There's drinking, drugs, there's impaired driving, there's reckless driving, and we just, all of the accidents that have happened over the last 5 years have kind of fallen in those categories, and it's not necessarily attributed to roadway design. The previous 5 years to those, we had 0 fatalities. Nothing had changed in the roadway. So I think we could go another 5 years and not have anything, or we could have another 2, in the next month. But it's really, we'll get into some of the measures that we'd like to take to mitigate those, but there's always going to be kind of those outliers that we have very little control over. The last kind of item is just the overall corridor safety. We finished up the 5th Ridge McIntyre multimodal corridor study around this time in 2018, 2 years ago. And at that time, one of the things that we had looked at and identified was that, Fifth Street in general is much higher than the statewide average, 3.5 times higher than the statewide average for just overall crash rating. Not all of those are severe crashes. A lot of them are, rear end, fender bender, some angle collisions, intersections, and the majority of them are occurring at both the signalized and unsignalized intersections, not on the segments in between.
Brendan, which section of road, I'm sorry, are you referring to when you looked at and I'm talking about the Fifth Ridge McIntyre study, which section specifically has the 3.5 times the statewide average?
So that is the section between Harris Road and Cherry.
Okay, I just want to be sure I know the segment. Thank you.
Yep. So as far as recommendations, we kind of broke them down into some immediate, midterm, and then long-term recommendations. So for immediate recommendations, we do recommend reducing the speed limit from 45 to 40. This, again, it wasn't necessarily because people are breaking the speed limit, but nearly a third of the accidents in the corridor are rear end collisions, which the reduction of the speed limit will hopefully help mitigate some of those. We will probably need to amend our zoning code. I think a lot of our speed limits in the city are stated in there, so we'll have to bring something to council to amend that, and then we'll obviously need CPD to help enforce. We'll put out advance signing several weeks ahead of time, and CPD will probably have warning period as well as drivers get acclimated to the new speed limit, but that will be needed. We are going to install flashing signal ahead signs, as kind of noted in the top right of the picture there. We do want to link this to our signals themselves, so both the Cherry Avenue signal and the Harris signal. So these would go 500 to 1,000 feet in advance of the signal and would activate and flash when that signal turns red, to give drivers just another visual warning that they're approaching a red signal. And then similarly for the unsignalized intersections, so Bailey and Old Ridge and some of those, just doing regular intersection warning signs, just to give drivers a heads up again that they're approaching an intersection where people may be slowing down to turn or turning out. The signals themselves, we'd like to install high visibility backplates, and then replacement of the permissive left green with a flashing yellow arrow. This is something that VDOT has kind of pushed and enacted in a lot of the rural communities. And nothing changes about the functionality. You're supposed to yield on a green ball anyway, but it really, it's been found that, it alerts drivers more that, they are supposed to yield in that condition. One of the other things that we think should be done is to remove the unsignalized crosswalk at Old Ridge. Again, with the width of Fifth Street there, it's really 5 lanes. You've got, two lanes in either direction and then a turn lane. And you're not that far from the intersection with a signalized actuated, pedestrian crossing that you could get across to the park or whatever there. And then lighting of intersection. So none of, I won't say none, most of the intersections have inadequate lighting. They're lights that were kind of thrown on power poles that may or may not have been in the area. And they don't really give kind of what the guidelines for intersection lighting would be. So we do recommend that, as a measure to increase safety at nighttime in the intersection would be to light those. Midterm option. So I think most counselors know at this point, you know, we have, since the Fifth Ridge McIntyre plan got finished, we've applied for two projects so far. We applied for the intersection of Cherry and Ridge. That was awarded. And then this last round of Smart Scale, we applied for the section between Cherry and Monticello or West Main Street to improve, you know, as those rounds of Smart Scale come up, you know, we think that we should continue to apply for them or look for other funding sources to implement that Fifth Ridge McIntyre plan. Another midterm solution might be pedestrian scale lighting. So this would be, you know, what we have downtown, you know, on West Main Street or the like, where we kind of have, you know, a more pedestrian level lighting. This would be an expensive option because of the length of the roadway, but it does give a sense of place. It makes it safer both for cyclists and pedestrians who are walking there, as well as just kind of giving, you know, visual clues to drivers that it's a place that should go a little bit slower. And then finally would be the installation of a roundabout. This would go just north of Bailey, kind of where the community gardens are today. What this would really do, and I think Peter Krebs had kind of spoke about it in his public comment, is, you know, it breaks up the corridor. Again, I think I had said, you know, we have a mile-long stretch between Cherry and Harris that's straight. There's kind of a sag in the middle, so from both directions you can kind of accelerate. So again, we don't have a speeding problem for the majority of traffic, but what we do have is a straight, you know, segment of roadway that people can get up to excessive speeds. What the roundabout would do would really put a damper on that right in the middle of the corridor, where drivers are forced to slow down. And, you know, it's kind of at the lower end. So exiting it from either side, you'd be going uphill instead of down. So, you know, I do think that it would be something that would help mitigate maybe some of the fatal crashes that have involved higher speeds. A long-term recommendation is really a mode change. You know, encourage more use of bike, pedestrian, and transit options. You know, Fifth Street is a heavily used, heavily commuter corridor. You know, we have 14 roads in and out of the city from the county, and this is one of the main ones. You know, it's nearly 21,000 vehicles that come in from the 64 direction there. And in this particular section of roadway, you know, there's 18,000 vehicles a day. So, you know, in order to really mitigate the congestion and that kind of stuff, we need to come up with something to you know, get people to switch the mode that they're using. You know, one of the options, you know, is to do a park and ride and increase our transit. I think it would require kind of a fundamental rework of how CAT operates. I know I've spoken to our director about that. You know, right now we kind of service a lot of the community and not so much the main lines. But, you know, if we could service the main lines first and get those lead times between buses down to 10 or 15 minutes and have a parking option, I think we could get, you know, it's not going to be everyone, obviously, but we could get people to actually, you know, park and transit into the city rather than, you know, just driving their cars. So again, that's kind of a long-term option, and, you know, it's not going to be done anytime soon, but it's something that we need to have on the horizon, especially considering, you know, new developments that are planned along this corridor. I know that we have several developments that have preliminary site plans and the such in this section that would add, I think it's about 500 residential mixed-use units, which would add another 5,000 vehicle trips a day. Again, I had said that, you know, we're at 18,000 vehicle trips now. That's almost increasing that by another quarter to third. So there is a significant number of vehicles that will be added to this roadway in the, you know, not too distant future. So the cost of some of these, the immediate items, signage and the like, we can do the majority of these within our current departmental budget. So there's no real increase to the city budget or ask from city council to implement those. Midterm solutions was kind of in order of cost, not necessarily priority, but intersection lighting itself would be like 50 to 100,000 per intersection, depending on what lighting is already there. The pedestrian scale lighting would be roughly $2 million. A roundabout option is between 3 and 4 million. And then kind of implementing this section of roadway for the Fifth Ridge McIntyre plan. And just to reiterate, most of that is buffered bike lanes, adding, you know, wider sidewalks, shared use paths, you know, making it a much more multimodal corridor with some vehicular traffic improvements with that, would cost around 15 to 20 million. And then again, the long-term, you know, park and ride options, transit options, you know, those, it's really hard to quantify without having a project scope. And with that, you know, if you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like me to answer any of the questions that were brought up in public comment, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you. I have a question about the recommendation to remove the crosswalk. That's my first one at Ridge.
Yes.
And, you know, I think that could potentially lead us to a more dangerous situation, because if you have, there's a way to access Tonsler by the tennis courts. And you have a lot of youth who live in that area that cross there. And I think that instead of going up and crossing at the light, they'll probably just run across. And then with no crosswalk there, that could create a potentially more dangerous situation. So if there's other avenues that we can explore there, I would be interested in, you know, in that mainly for them. I know adults who are out running and walking with their children and stuff like that, it may be a different scenario, but I'm concerned about that part. My other question was how many of the 18,000, and you said 1/3 of the kind of fender bender accidents? Is that what?
Yep.
So how many total accidents are, if you're saying that we have 18,000 vehicle trips per day, how often are we having accidents, and are they always attributed to speed, or is it something else that's happening there? And are these at that Willoughby, are most of them at that intersection where there has been, you know, in the past that it's been some kind of issue there, or are they other places on the road?
Yeah, Brian, could you pull up those secondary slides I had sent you?
Yes, I can. Just a moment.
I had some other visual aids anticipating some questions.
And which slide would you like me to go to?
It's towards the end. I think it's the last 2 slides.
Whoops.
So to answer your question, this is kind of the, you know, plotted accidents in the corridor. So you can see how they're kind of congregated around the intersections for the most part. The yellow on that, the yellow squares are angled collisions, which is usually, when someone is trying to pull out or pull across traffic and, gets hit. The red triangle or the red squares are the rear end collisions. So you can see they're, again, they're fairly evenly spread between all of the intersections themselves. And then you can go one more slide, Brian. So the one on the left there is not kind of the section we're talking about. This is the 1 lane section of bridge that goes between Cherry and West Main Street. And you can see all of the accidents that are there. And, again, those are not high speed at all. Those are really congestion related accidents in that corridor. And there's much more kind of interspersed between the intersections themselves as well. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Oh, you questioned how many total accidents. I think on the whole corridor for the 5th Street study that we did, there were roughly 250 accidents going from Harris Street on the north, so up by 250, all the way down to Harris Road on the south. And that was over a 5-year period. I don't have it broken down for this specific stretch of roadway. But I believe it's, probably around half of that over a 5-year period.
All right, thank you. Counselors, questions or comments?
And my questions were also just similarly around, it seemed like a lot of the feedback we've gotten prior to this summer was around the Harris intersection near Willoughby. And I was just trying to get a sense for what that looked like. And now I've seen it visually versus Cherry Avenue. But again, a lot of that also is because the speeds coming off of 64 and going through the intersection. If you don't have to stop, it's just continuous. Whereas I think when you get to Cherry Avenue, there's just so many things kind of remind you to slow down. That's why I'm just concerned a lot of these crashes aren't even in that straightaway. I'm not saying there hasn't been significant crashes, there have been. But a lot of them are at the signal, which is a stop. I mean, where it should be a stop. I mean, that should be an interruption point, and it just seems to continue to be an issue.
Well, and that's something that kind of shown nationwide that I think a lot of people ask for traffic signals for various reasons, but that's why we're a lot of times hesitant to put them in, is because most of the time your number of crashes will actually go up, even if your severity goes down, just because you are introducing, people who are slowing down or slamming on their brakes because they weren't paying attention and they see a red light, or, they thought they had a red light or a green light to go through and somebody else had a green light. So it just kind of, when you don't have a signal, usually people, especially if so take for instance, Bailey, if you don't have a signal there, that you have to look for an opening to get out. Whereas if you had a signal and you get a green light, you might not be paying attention to the people coming down the roadway. And so you'll just pull out because you had a green light. And if someone else runs the red light, it's a more severe accident. So yeah, I mean, intersections in general and signalized intersections, it's not unnormal to see increased accidents there.
Can you talk a little bit more about the potential of a signal at Bailey? Because I think the public, would be interested in hearing. So if the severity of the accidents could potentially be decreased, and I know that the timing of these accidents have been something that, has been mentioned as why that may not work, because the light may not be red, at that time of the morning or something like that. But could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Brian, can you pull up the 3rd slide in that presentation? While he's pulling that up. Essentially, again, there's a there's a manual that we use as traffic engineers. It's used, all over the United States. It's called the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And it really sets forth, where signs need to go, spacing of signs, when you put in signalized intersections versus stop control, just a stop sign. And it really gives that uniformity all over the United States so that, when you approach an intersection, you see a sign, you know what it means, and you kind of know what to expect. And it has, several warrants for when to install a traffic signal. Those go into, the first warrant is really, it's volume based, how many vehicles are coming out of the secondary street. And, is there so much of a delay that you really need to have that signal there to warrant, allowing vehicles to pull out. We did check it against that warrant as well as the others, that location, and it just doesn't meet the signal warrants. And one of the warrants as well is accidents. And you're, according to that, it has that you need to have 5 accidents in a 12-month period at that location that would be solved or mitigated by having a traffic signal. Again, we didn't meet it at that location. I'm not saying we don't have accidents there, but again, it doesn't necessarily meet the warrants for installing it. I know some people have suggested to install the traffic signal to break up the corridor, but if we did install one there, kind of against the traffic warrants, it would be what's referred to as a semi-actuated signal, where for the main line for 5th Street, it would remain green until a vehicle approached from Bailey to kind of trigger that they needed a break in traffic to get out. And for the higher speed situations that have occurred in some of the fatalities, like installing a stoplight there would not have affected those at all. A lot of them happened later at night, when there's very few vehicles on the road or coming out. So, that was why kind of I recommended the roundabout option as opposed to just installing a traffic light, besides the fact that it's not warranted there. But, the roundabout option really breaks up the geometry of the roadway to force people to slow down.
So in terms of time frame, if that light is a possibility, like how long would it take to install that versus the long-term roundabout conversation?
Time frame wise, it would definitely be quicker to install a traffic signal, but again, it would be, however long it takes to get the funding for it, and then installation is a month or so. So it's there would be some fabrication time for the mast arms and that kind of stuff, which would be usually 6 to 9 months to fabricate those. So it would be probably at least a year just to do a traffic signal there.
Mayor Walker, one thing I would just reiterate that Bren was indicating that the signal is not warranted at that intersection. Therefore, if it's not warranted, it would not be recommended at this time. If you install an unwarranted signal, you create the situation of adding or increasing future accidents. So unless it's warranted, it would not be recommended at this time.
I understand, but I'm trying to figure out what's the difference between whether it's if the law says you can't versus whether we could make a decision to do it, is why it sounded like it is a possibility. It's just not something that would be recommended based on the code.
Mhm.
And I also, when I hear what they say about the patterns of like when, if this light is at, like Bailey's a much more secondary intersection, I just don't see that it's gonna solve the issue. Whereas, you know, obviously a roundabout would, and that it would slow down everybody going through regardless of what's happening in the opposite direction because you're a forced slowdown. So I'm just not even sure, besides being warranted, that it would really address the concerns that are being raised because it's.
Well, I
often-
guess it depends on what concerns we're talking about. So the feedback that we have received. So there's one, you know, the trying to figure out how to create a situation where people cannot get up to these speeds that results in these the fatalities. That's one. And then the Willoughby, that intersection, and the report that we got a couple years ago, if I'm remembering correctly about that, they were just talking about just as more developments have increased in that area, you know, the Longwood type of, you know, those developments down there, that there have been since then accidents. So that's one area that I think the people who have concerns about that area would have very different concerns from like Bailey Road. I don't know how often you all come off of that Bailey Road, but you can sit there sometimes for quite a bit of time, depending on what time of day it is, trying to get out of there. So that just would be another, you know, area. And then up further, they are talking about speed and better lighting for crossing and stuff like that. And then Brennan introduced, and that's what I was thinking when you were talking about Red Street, because just living in this area, depending on what time of day it is, those cars are back to back. And I think we talked about this before, we talked about just the signalization being off, and where in terms of correcting those things, because that seems to be still, you know, a major issue at that intersection, to getting up to, you know, up to Red Street. And I think by Barrett, I've seen people try to get across the street to their cars near that crosswalk. And so I think there are problem areas, and depending on which ones people have to use the most, you know, their interest in what we do would be different. So I understand we have to take the whole thing into consideration and the recommendations, but I think it's important to know whether it's, you know, what's possible and what does long-term, you know, look like. You know, how long is long-term?
As Brendan indicated, the circumstances can change. And in evaluation, one of the things you just identified is intersection delay. So if you're sitting at an unsignalized intersection, the longer you delay, that is one of the warrants. The traffic signal is installed to correct certain type of accidents, certain delays. So we can continue to evaluate that to make the determination of, once it does meet warrants, come back to City Council with a recommendation for installation. And we have to follow the Virginia Code, which follows the Virginia Traffic Manual Traffic Uniform Control Devices, the MUTCD. And by that, we can continue to evaluate those unsignalized intersections. But the recommendations that are presented this evening are based upon the conditions that are observed out there today and what we anticipate. But part of the evaluation will be continue reviewing the conditions out there as they do change and as circumstances do warrant or necessitate additional changes. But we will return to the council once those changes do occur with the appropriate recommendations.
And Brendan, one of the commenters earlier today was talking about just the ability to reduce the number of lanes in this stretch. And I'll be honest, my times driving there, it's never really been a situation where the lanes have been completely congested, but obviously then you're coming up onto those intersections. Can you speak to just the flow of traffic with the 4 lanes versus if we did do a pilot study that reduced that?
Yeah, I can. Brian, can you pull up those alternatives again?
Yep, which slide do you need?
I need the 5, 6, and 7. We can start with 5. So, this was an option, Heather, that we, had explored because there was, kind of a push from the community on Twitter and some other people contacting me about, what would it do? So, I was interested to see, I kind of had a feeling it might not, but I wanted to give them, respect their ideas and at least explore that. So we had EPR who did the Fifth Street study and had kind of the model all built out. So the main issues aren't necessarily in the stretch between Cherry and Harris. They're on either end, and that's where the issues really kind of come to a head. So you can see in this slide, this is the area just south of Harris between there and Fifth Street Station Parkway. The blue line would be, kind of what is there as far as the queue today. If we took the section north of there down to a single lane, the yellow line is what the queue would look like, in the, I believe this is the AM peak. AM northbound. So as you can see, it actually queues through the intersection, which I don't think it takes a traffic engineer to kind of see why that would be a bad idea. When you kind of approach that, situation, it results in gridlock. You can't have, you can have a green light coming from Wegmans on Fifth Street to head north, but there's absolutely no place for you to go. So you're just kind of stopped, in the roadway waiting, and who knows when it'll clear that you can actually go. If you go to the next slide, Brian. So this would be the queue. So this is southbound. This would be in the afternoon. So this is from the same intersection, but coming from town back out. And there you see the queue would go all the way past Brookwood and approach, come close towards to Bailey up there. So the new development of people coming out of is it Beacon on Fifth and Harmony Ridge and those, it would be very, very, very difficult for them to get out of those. And then the last one, the next slide, this kind of shows what would happen at Cherry, and Cherry Elliott and Fifth. And really what worries me is, again, these are kind of today's traffic numbers. As we increase housing in the city and vehicles and whatever else, like, the leg coming from West Main Street is only, 2, 3, maybe 4 cars away from the intersection of Monticello. And because that intersection is so close to West Main Street and some of those, like, if you gridlock that intersection, the domino effect of that takes you to Monticello and Second. It takes you to West Main Street and Ridge, which takes you to 4th and West Main, which, you can get the idea. It kind of compounds and dominoes through the network of just gridlock in downtown at peak hour. So it's just not an option that I can recommend, doing.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I have a question. If the roundabout option was brought forward, would that also assist with people turning and coming onto and leaving Old Ridge Street? And would it also help with people trying to turn from Bailey?
Yes. So, well, yes.
And if you could add Cleveland Avenue to your comments too, that would be helpful for me.
Sure. So I see it as one piece of the puzzle. One of the recommendations that was in the corridor study as a whole was to install what's referred to as an R-cut, which is basically a forced U-turn. And you basically wouldn't allow people to make left-hand turns either in or out of those. So, you know, if you were, for instance, if you were heading northbound and wanted to turn left into Bailey, you'd actually go up to the roundabout, go around, and then come and make a right-hand turn. So we would have to, you know, install one of those forced U-turns to the south as well. But having two of those on kind of bookends in the system, you know, would allow us to do that in the future, to eliminate those left turns and just kind of force people into a, you know, counterclockwise motion around to eliminate those left turns. The other thing that would do, if we chose to do it, would be if we no longer need left-hand turns, we could get rid of the majority of that median that's there, and we could reallocate that space to protected bike lanes or multi-use paths, or, you know, something along those lines. It gives us more space to work with. You know, right now, you know, I had looked it up and I forgot to write it down, but I believe it was sometime in the early 2000s that the city installed the bike lanes that are on there now. And, you know, in order to do that, we didn't change the pavement width. All we did was narrow the travel lanes. So what we have today is, you know, minimum travel lanes, minimum bike lanes, and minimum sidewalks with no buffer for any of them. And, you know, that's, in my opinion, is what's led to a lot of the uncomfortable feeling, both for pedestrians and cyclists, is that, you know, everyone's just kind of crammed into that space and shoehorned in. You know, it's definitely better than not having a bike lane there. But it does put you, you know, dangerously close to traffic that's moving at 45 miles an hour. So, you know, it's one of the higher stress environments that was identified in the corridor study, you know, for cyclists and pedestrians. So anything we can do to give them more space going forward in the future would benefit.
And just to your point, because that was something that I had in my notes, I think this is also something we need to think about when, you know, the conversations around reduction in car usage, and we attempt to modify like the roadways based on the demands, you know, for the bike and ped, but we haven't actually, it appears, reduced the car usage yet. And that was just a question that I had, was there an increase in any of the incidents that occurred based on the bike lanes just kind of being thrown in there?
I think if there were, they were pretty minimal. Again, most, you know, normally the type of accident that you would see from that would be, you know, a side swipe or something like that, where, you know, you've narrowed the travel lanes, and there were fairly few of those. Again, most, you know, 2/3 of all the accidents during the study period fell into either the rear end collision or the angled collision. And then there were, you know, deer strikes off the road, and, you know, some of those other, you know, ancillary kind of offshoot accidents.
Okay. Counselors, are there any more questions? So if everyone, Mr. Wheeler had sent me a message that Miss Rose had raised her hand to speak. And I think just given the circumstances that if there's no, if you all are okay with that, to allow her to, if she has any questions at this time, to have a 3-minute time here.
That's
Mr. Wood.
fine. I note that she also, just a moment ago, sent an email through the city website about this meeting, and I assume about some of the discussion we're having. So let's hear from her.
Mr. Wheeler.
Ms. Rose, can you hear us?
Hello, everyone.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Benta Rose, and my son was one of the fatalities on Fifth Street Extended. I had some concerns regarding that roadway as well. Even though speed may contribute to his fatality, I just had a question about I know that you guys were talking about some lightning in the area, like the median. And I know that the cars that pull out of the driveways there, so my son actually driving down that road, SUV pulled out into the traffic. And so he tried to avoid the vehicle and he hit a tree. So is there, with the cars that pull out of the driveway, is there something that, I know you can't put lights up everywhere, but is there like that area? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the accident before you get to Cleveland. There's a tree with flowers in his memory there. So I just had some concerns about how the vehicles pull out into oncoming traffic, because I'm thinking that he was trying to avoid the truck, and so that's how he went into the tree. But then in that area, there's no lightning. Like at 921, him going down that road, and driving a motorcycle, it's just one way. You can't really, with your helmet on, you can't see to the right because you're just going straight ahead. And so is there any way to put something there?
Okay, so the question is just lighting around that end where I guess the duplexes are up to that Cleveland Avenue, and maybe a little bit above that area in terms of we can make things more visible there. That's the question.
Yes, Mayor Walker. Because the trees and with the branching, and I think the pole that's there, it's not enough light there. And I guess if there had been something there at Bailey, I think people just tend to have that Fifth Street as a that straight stretch corridor where you can just kind of zoom down the road. And so
Okay. All right, did you have any other questions you wanted them to answer? Ms. Rose? Okay.
No, ma'am, Ms. Walker.
Okay. All right. So Brennan, Mr. Duncan, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I think we had spoke to that a little bit, and as far as I think the pedestrian scale lighting along the corridor would kind of help because of the tree canopy. Tall lights probably won't do a whole lot. We have that kind of in several spots in the city where we're trying to strike the balance between tree canopy and lighting, and they don't always go well together. It was noted in the police report that it was dark that night when that the accident happened, that the roadway could have been better lit, but that it was not found that that was the contributing factor in the accident. So
how do we I guess balance that in terms of making sure that trees are present, but that things are visible? Like, what is the remedy for that?
Yeah, again, it's, trying to keep, if we can keep those lights under the tree canopy. Again, the majority of the lights that are out there on the corridor now are the kind of the Dominion scale light that are, on a power pole. So the lights themselves are sitting up, 30 to 40 feet above the roadway. So, if there's a tree nearby, it blocks a lot of that light. Doing a lower pedestrian scale light, kind of provides that light under the tree canopy.
I had one question. I mean, it sounds like the fundamental problem is just the basic design of this road in the lack of design and structure that's pedestrian and human scale. Would you say that the Fifth Ridge McIntyre plan as is addresses those fundamental issues and the challenge is securing the funding and the timing of it? Or would you say that that plan itself is still not addressing some of those fundamental problems with just the basic design of this stretch of road?
I mean, I think it addresses what we can address. Again, this is always going to be, in my opinion at least, this is always going to be a traffic-centric corridor. Again, we have 14 places in and out of the city. So if you think about, we're going to neck this down, or we're not going to have this as a vehicularly centric corridor, which of those other 14 are you moving those vehicle trips to? We have, I kind of gone through and added them all up, with our population, we have 185,000 vehicle trips in and out of the city every single day. We are the economic driver for, Albemarle County and the surrounding area. We, whether we like it or not, we have commuters that are coming in and out. The corridor study, it does provide a lot more room for bicycles with protected bike lanes. It provides a lot more room for pedestrians with, shared use path and wider sidewalks. It introduces some more crosswalks, that could be protected kind of at the main intersections, whether that be Bailey or some Brookwood or whatever. So I think it goes a long way to address kind of the concerns with, not having enough space for those other modes. But as far as completely removing vehicles, that kind of speaks to my long-term goal of, we have to find a way to reduce the 185,000 vehicle trips into the city if we want to make a dent in kind of, the overall goal of reducing those vehicles and making it more pedestrian friendly.
I guess the final question is, those other 13 main entrance corridors to the city, are there others that are less dangerous, more dangerous? Is this one seeing more crashes and fatalities than the others? And if so, what sort of design elements are determining which entrance corridors are more or less safe?
We haven't done necessarily a safety analysis on all of them. Just to kind of run down the list quickly, we've got High Street, Locust, Park, John Warner Parkway, McIntyre, Rugby Avenue, Lower Rugby, Emmett Street, Barracks, Ivy, Fontaine, Old Lynchburg Road, 5th Street, which we're talking about, Avon, and Monticello. So, if you think about all of those, like some of them are just a much different character to the roadway. They were always, and this kind of goes to how our city has developed. A lot of those roadways were never intended to carry traffic. They were residential roadways that, as the city has developed and the county has developed, they've gotten a lot more traffic. If you speak to anyone on Locust, I'm sure they would say that, they don't like the fact that, you know, they're right off of 250 bypass and vehicles are, you know, kind of going down their street. The same with, you know, Rugby and some of those others. You know, really the only one of those 14, or the only ones of those 14 that were kind of designed as arterials are Emmett Street, 5th Street, and you could maybe argue High Street. And all the other ones are just kind of absorbing traffic that those other three just can't handle. They're, you know, we could fit, you know, this section of roadway, we could fit more vehicles on because we have 4 lanes, but you immediately get to the section just to the north of Cherry where we're down to a single lane, and, you know, that section's pretty much at capacity, which you can see in the crashes that I had shown. Like, you know, the more congestion you get, the higher your accident rate is going to get as well.
And then we added the one, which is the Parkway. That was new.
Right. I guess I was using kind of the, I'll call it the urban ring, using 250 and 64. But yeah, I mean, John Warner Parkway even really wasn't designed. I mean, we intentionally designed it not to, you know, hold more traffic. I know there was a lot of reports that said that that should have been, you know, 4 lanes heading north, and the county didn't want kind of that, and the city didn't want that, you know, cut through through that area. So it was designed as a lower speed 2-lane roadway, and it does have, you know, a significant amount of vehicles, but you know, it doesn't even hold as many vehicles as, you know, it's roughly the same number of vehicles that we have on this section of of Ridge Street.
And my last question is more, I guess, for Mr. Blair, but I know we had allocated, you know, some funding of maybe 2018, yes, 2020. So I think it was 2018 for increased lighting on the downtown mall and, you know, that area. And at the time, it seemed to be more of like perceived safety risk versus actual. And I'm just wondering, since we know that lighting, you know, could be better in this area, and it's not necessarily just, you know, perceived, if we could look at, again, I don't remember the exact amount, and I don't know how much this midterm solution, because there's no amount next to how much that will cost. But if we could even do, you know, better lighting. I know it was the security feature, you know, that was
I believe it was 180,000 for the downtown lighting, and that was like, it was several intersections, but that was mostly supplementing existing lighting that was kind of at the intersection.
Oh, there. Okay.
Whereas I think, you know, depending on what we're talking about, you know, it'll be 30 to 50,000 if we're doing just the intersection lighting. But I had said kind of in the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I saw that one. I think we're talking about something else here.
Yeah,
right.
If we're talking about the pedestrian scale lights that you put in every 50 to 60 feet, you know, that's a $2 million project.
$2 million. Okay. All right.
Mayor Walker, to your question, we do have the capital improvement program work session on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
We can put a few minutes to discuss that downtown lighting item.
And it was also security. Has all of that money been spent too?
Okay, we'll take a look at that as well on for Friday's CIP work session.
Okay.
It sounds like you guys are going to go ahead and implement these immediate measures, maybe shy of that one crosswalk that maybe there's some, I agree that might be a step that's not the best interest of those that are living there, but I also see the risks. But I agree with Mayor Walker's perspective on that. But everything else there is stuff that you guys are going to do within your own budget then?
Yes, the only one that will take a significant amount of time and I say significant, may take a few months, is the blinking kind of signalized warning. Just because we're gonna have to run conduits and bore conduits along the corridor to run, wires to connect the signal and all of that. But budget wise, we should be able to handle all of those, within our operation budget.
And in terms of something possibly at that crosswalk, is that something that you can, is there another recommendation that you could make there?
I can take another look at that. If you're saying that we absolutely do not want to remove it, we can look at what other options may be available there.
Right now, is it just marked one of those fluorescent pedestrian signs
Yes.
pointing at it? Okay.
And what about that really, really reflective paint? I mean, I know in some places I've seen crosswalks that, that really, when you come up on them, not too far away, suddenly your lights are hitting them, and it really reminds you that, hey, there's a crosswalk here.
Yeah, again, I can look at what options we have, whether it's signage or a rapid flashing beacon or whatever else. I believe that we kind of set criteria for the rapid flashing beacon with our new standards and design manual rewrite. So we may just have to take some pedestrian counts out there and see, if it meets what we set internally as our, kind of warrants for installing the rapid flashing beacons.
Thank you so much for all of this. I know this presentation it's really appreciated.
I appreciate all the backup, like every question we had, you had something for it. Thank you, Brennan.
You're welcome.
I wouldn't mind having those files at some point if we could.
Just the PowerPoint presentations?
Yeah, it's helpful when people write to us just to have some of that data.
Yeah, I think Brian or myself can send those out to council.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to my last just reminder was we had this conversation, I think last year when we were having the discussion about the crosswalk on Main Street, whether it met the criteria or, like whatever, how do you figure out how to make an exception if it doesn't? So you're gonna just let us know whether it does or doesn't, and then what are the possible options?
Yep, I can do that. If you'd like, I can plan on bringing that back to you in January when we have the Cherry Avenue report done, and can kind of give an update on that if that works.
Okay. Are any of these things happening before January, or they'll all be happening next year?
No, I believe that the majority of the signage and that kind of stuff we'll be working on over the next month. Some of the traffic signal modifications may be, into the new year, but yeah, all of the signage stuff should be done fairly quickly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Walker, if I may, I'd also like to thank Mr. Brown from Public Works, Mr. Ikafuna from NDS, and also the police department did also help Mr. Duncan and wanted to make sure all those departments, I agree with Councilor Hill, this has been a very comprehensive overview of this situation. I just wanted to thank other staff that have been involved as well.
Yeah, thank all of you.
Thank you
for your effort. Okay. Next we have a report city logo discussion, and Mr. Blair will present.
Good evening, Mayor Walker and councilors. During the past couple of months, there have been some questions about the city logo raised, and in your packet, you will find that there's a discussion about the history of the logo and its difference between the city seal and the logo. Ms. Robertson prepared some of those historical materials for you. The current logo was adopted in 1971. And again, understanding that some of you have asked about perhaps changing the logo or perhaps having a new city logo, you will find in the memo our first course of action. And I guess really our first course of action would be to ask the council, do you want us to look at, as a group, do you want us direct us to look at developing a new city logo? And if that is the council's wish, I think the first thing we need to do is to reach out to departments and ask what the cost of that change would be. As you know, you see so many city vehicles and other, you see this logo in different parts of the city on different city facilities as well as vehicles. So probably if tonight the council directs us to go forward with looking at a new city logo, we would first bring you back a report about the total cost of changing that logo. And we probably also, if the council wants to go forward with this, we'd look at the idea of what do we want to do to change it? You know, the historical materials point to this was a contest back in 1971. That could be an option. It could be that you want to hire a professional designer of some sort to develop a new city logo. I think, again, that would be depending on tonight, and if you all direct us that you want to go forward with the new city logo, we would come back to you with a cost and probably also in a memo present a few options for you to direct us which option you prefer in developing that new logo. But again, this is, I think tonight is more for us to just get a sense from the council as a whole. Do you want us to proceed with revising or coming up with a new city logo? And we're happy to take any questions.
I definitely support it. And I think that the idea of maybe looking at what we get from citizens in terms of, you know, if there was kind of a contest, design contest, then that would, I think, be an interesting way to, you know, get citizens engaged in the process.
I don't disagree. Like, I certainly think that we need to be relooking at this logo, and I would love to have citizen involvement. But when you lay out the steps it's going to take and the assessment by staff, I just am not in support of us doing this at this time right now, given the other priorities that are on staff's plates to even like evaluate the costs. I just am trying to figure out how we can prioritize our most immediate needs right now while we are certainly not full on staff. But I don't want that to say that I certainly think this needs to be looked at the appropriate time, in my opinion, because I think there's some updates that are definitely needed to make it reflect more of our values. I also feel like the timing of our strategic planning and what's going to come out of that might help to drive some of the, you know, the direction we might give and where the city logo may go in the future. But that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
I would say my feeling about it is, first of all, I've never understood why there was a cannon on there. As far as I can tell, no cannon was ever fired in either the Revolutionary War or the Civil War within the city limits of Charlottesville. Nonetheless, that was apparently chosen for its historical value or something. But I absolutely agree with Councillor Hill. We've got a lot of stuff that our staff is doing. We've got a lot of stuff that we should be doing. Comprehensive plan, affordable housing plan, zoning rewrites, and those are just the things that are going to be coming to us from the consultants in coming months. If we didn't have any other huge planning issues, not to mention the question of a strategic plan that ought to undergird all of that stuff, if we didn't have anything else to be doing, fine. If staff didn't have anything else to be doing, fine. But we've got a lot to be doing, and I don't favor spending a lot of time on that issue at this point.
I am definitely for looking at it. I think delaying it a little while as we are. I mean, I don't think our current city logo represents us as a city. I think we have changed. We have been re-examining who we are. And I think a logo is pretty important with that. But I do agree that with COVID, with where our businesses are right now, where people are right now, diverting city dollars or diverting staff time when we need to be figuring some other things out, we might need to take a look at this in 6 months and see where we're at there. That would be, I mean, I'm very much for the logo changing. I like I said, I do not think it represents Charlottesville anymore. But I would like to say, where are we at in 6 months from now, as far as our staff's time with comp plan, with the demands on their time, and also we'll have a better idea of what we're looking at with COVID and how it's going to affect the next budget cycles for the next year or two.
I'd say I generally agree. I mean, I think it would be an exciting opportunity to have the community involved through a contest or some kind of other deep community engagement, to have something that's much more reflective of where we are as a community today than in 1971, especially since we don't really even have much history about why this particular logo was developed and its particular significance. But I would agree, in order for us to do it right, I think it would require a real investment in community engagement. And obviously, if we actually make a change, there's going to be real cost and time associated with updating everything. And I just, looking at COVID, looking at leadership transition, looking at our budget shortfall, this just wouldn't jump to the top as a priority to, divert our limited resources. But I would definitely want to put a pin in it as something that I think we should examine. And I think would be an exciting way to just involve the community in updating, even just visually, where we are as a community now versus 1971. So I definitely want to put a pin in it, but at this time, just given all the crises going on, I don't know if now I could justify putting it at the top.
And I do like the idea of a contest again. I think it gives people a chance. I think we have a very creative community here, and it could give, people from 7 to 70, something to pull together and showing what it would be really interesting to see different people's perspectives of what a logo should look like for Charlottesville too. So.
And I just want to state that even though I support this, and I think that it's, part of the renaming buildings, removing statues, like it fits right into that staff, even though I support this, and I think that it should be, I wasn't the counselor who brought this up. So I just want to make sure that that is pretty clear, even though I think it's a good idea and I would vote for us to continue with it now. I was not the one to bring this up to move it to the top of the list. But I still think that it's something that we, could do, even if we're saying we even want this general information back in a 6-month time period versus waiting till 6 months to give it a go or something like that.
I think we've got the direction, and I'll put a placeholder on my calendar for June.
So at that time, are you saying that you're going to bring it back up at that time to see if there's interest, or are you going to have the report from the departments at that time?
It's my hope that, as we're approaching budget over the next few months, that might be a good time to actually ask folks to take just a look at their budget to see, if they can give an estimate on removal. And then, once the budget's adopted in April, we should be able to come back, I'm hoping by June, and give you that estimate on cost. And again, it seems like there's some interesting contest. I mean, I might ask Mr. Engel or somebody in economic development to look and see what other communities have done in that regard, if there have been contests and best practices.
Okay, counselors, are there any other questions or comments?
No, I just wanted to take responsibility for being the person who brought it forward.
Well, I only said it because I was the only one like go, and then
No,
everybody
I was
like,
the
she's-
one. I
she's
was
adding something else to
saying.
our plate, and it's not. Yeah, I wasn't. So just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay. All right. So thank you. Thank you for that. So we're to other business, and I know there were, 2 items. So I know Councilor Hill had one too, but we received the emails. I sent an email out last week or the week before, just asking council if this Monday meeting date and staff, and I don't know, Mr. Blair, were you able to talk to any other staff about, or just or no about
Not at this point, no, ma'am.
Okay. And so I just wanted to, I spoke to Mr. Blair earlier, and Ms. Thomas said that either a Monday or Tuesday would work best for her. And let me back up. I proposed, along with trying to do reports early in the day, this was something that else that I thought, would potentially be helpful for some of the concerns we were getting from staff about, workloads and, working through weekends and things like that. I thought that this may be helpful. And even with my conversation with Councilor Hill, when I was talking to her about it, I thought I had talked to her about it before, and she said that email was the first time. And so it just seemed like maybe what I thought would be helpful, maybe not, staff may not consider it to be as helpful right now. I know counselors, you weighed in, so just wanted to make sure, is that something we're just gonna leave with having the council meetings on Mondays? Because Ms. Thomas did say that she was working on the meeting schedule for 2021. And so if it was something that we were going to, change before January, we would have to do it, or if we're just removing it off the table, then we can move on to.
I mean, personally, I am incredible. I mean, for me, it's very much about if staff found that moving it to be more helpful or not, and if the community feels it to be more helpful or not. So if we're getting feedback that actually it would cause more pain and suffering, I guess, I don't want.
Yeah, I don't think that's the feedback we got, but I just think we need to either since the emails were and the conversation started, we just need to either do or not, or just remove it off the table.
I mean, I think unless there was a real benefit that staff could articulate, that I'm comfortable just keeping with the Mondays. I think that's what most people are used to. It's a rhythm we're in. And I understand the point about is staff working over the weekend. I think that mostly is for us. Like, we are the ones, that probably are being the most impacted by the Monday, because we get the information and we're reviewing it over the weekend and talking to each other over the weekend in preparation for that meeting. But I'm comfortable that hasn't been an issue. And I certainly think this is more of a staff question for me, and what is most accommodating to them. And just to let them all know, we're looking at, I think we've narrowed down to Mondays or Tuesdays, because as you get later in the week, there's just a lot more conflicts, and there's some standing conflicts that I think can make it more challenging later in the week. And some of us like to just get it over with, maybe, and earlier, and maybe that's how some people feel. So Monday, it's done, move on. But,
well, I think what Councilor McGill brought up a couple of times ago is even about sending emails and because we are often having
Asking
to
questions,
ask questions that staff has to chime into. So that's it. And so, Mr. Blair, what do you think? Do you want? It just sounds like it's not a big like shift. So if staff or don't think that it would be helpful to move the meetings to the first and third Tuesday, then we will just remove it from the conversation. All right, Councilor Hill.
And then the other item, which I have raised with several of you, is looking at the rest of our meeting schedule for the remainder of the year and proposing that we would forego our December 21st meeting, just to give all kind of a break around the holidays, and just given the intensity of both our meeting schedules as well as workloads for staff.
That being our regular council meeting, right?
Yeah, yes.
As long as there's we're not worried about having to pass any CARES things or anything like that, anything that would come up, because that would be our last meeting of the year, right? Mr. Blair, do you feel like we could get all city business accomplished in that first meeting then?
Well, you bring up a good point about CARES Act funding. What we could do is, if we can't get that completely buttoned up by the 7th, we could ask council to hold a special meeting for that one issue.
Okay.
There's also, it's been advertised, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mayor Walker. It was advertised that boards and commissions appointments would be made on December 21st, so you still would need a closed meeting for that.
Okay, that wouldn't require a lot of staff support. I guess the other question, for Mr. Blair is, could we create a deadline for materials for that first January meeting so that people aren't agonizing over the holidays as if we're having that December meeting? I'm just not sure how far in advance we can plan. I'm just trying to avoid, I'm thinking about the holidays are between the 21st and then that next meeting. How can we front end load that so that everyone can truly just take a real break?
And my thought there is whether that January 4th meeting is a better meeting to not have than the 21st. If that's what if we want to give staff, if the staff a break, is that a better option?
Yeah, I had written down 21st or 4th, and there's a question mark, yeah.
Ms. Thomas, what do you think, since you are the one for help, getting us ready for the meetings? And when staff is getting information in and what that looks like what would your preference be? And Mr. Blair, what are your thoughts?
The schedule has already been sent out to staff about the deadline for the 21st. I definitely think they would appreciate having a longer weekend for the first. Since the first is on a Friday, then having that 4th would be a great extension of that.
Mr. Blair, what are your thoughts? Would that mean we would have to vote on the 2021 meeting schedule on the 21st, or could we still do that on the 18th or the 19th?
What I would advise is you could still do your meeting schedule on the 19th of January, but we would have a motion at the 21st to cancel the January 4th meeting.
Okay. So, council, what are you all, right now, the way I am, I want to ask every staff member that's listening what their thoughts are. But anyway, I know that's probably not ideal to do, but the counselors, do you want to weigh in on what?
I mean, I think the 4th I remember last year being really stretched to, as far as my family, that's why I didn't go see my family, because we started up right there after the first of the year. So, I know, I'm sure a lot of, school's still out then, if people are traveling at all, which, I know I've just canceled all my holiday plans, but
hopefully they're not traveling. It's not safe.
Maybe they're in an RV. But it also just gives maybe a few extra days to recuperate from the holidays too, and not go straight into a city council meeting.
And last year, the meeting was on the 6th, so that was already a few extra days because the
Yeah.
first was on the Wednesday. So that's,
But especially with it being like a Friday, I mean, let's people come back after the holidays and kind of get their feet under them again and actually have taken a break. I mean, I'm all for it.
I think it's a nice clean cut at the 21st, and then they literally, you know, there's still work being done, but they don't have to think about us for a stretch of time.
well, they're still probably thinking about us, but
Oh.
it's not preparing for a meeting. All right, so it sounds like it's gonna be the 4th.
Yeah, it sounds great. Michael?
That's fine.
We're not doing both? I'm sorry.
We can make the December meeting short.
Yeah.
Well, this one was short, so we keep that up. But
We're not done yet. Don't jinx us.
we're
close.
pretty much done.
We're so close.
All right, so Mr. Blair, if it's the 4th, then what do we need to do? Just, it'll come up next meeting.
We'll have a motion at your December 21st meeting for you to cancel the January 4th, 2021.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, any other business? Okay. So Mr. Willer, I'll turn it over to you for the matters by the public.
Thank you, Mayor Walker. And I know you didn't ask, but I support the sage advice of Keena Thomas on skipping January 4th. So thank you. If you're in
Well, I
the,
did say I would ask every staff member on here, but
yeah,
you know,
and
I
I'm glad
guess
you didn't do that.
things like that.
If you're in the audience and you would like to speak to council, click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar or press *9 if you're on via telephone. We have two people with their hands raised right now, Tanisha Hudson and Andy Orban. Tanisha, you're on with City Council. You've got 3 minutes.
So I want to talk about Fifth Street again. So what doesn't make sense to me, and I know Mr. Blair was thanking the Charlottesville Police Department, but this is what doesn't make sense to me. Chief Brackney had the audacity, or her department had the audacity to put cameras up right off of 8th Street, facing up towards Hardy Drive. But we have no cameras on 5th Street, and there's been fatalities on 5th Street. Long before Ramin's death, long before the Brooks boy death, long before the white guy that died at the Harris Road intersection in 5th Street. There's been accidents coming out of the shopping center on 5th Street. There's been numerous accidents all throughout 5th Street, deadly ones. No cameras at all, period. But we have cameras in Black communities. And then the mayor was just praising leadership in the police department, saying they don't want more policing in Black neighborhoods. But y'all throwing cameras up there, I'm not understanding. Like y'all contradict yourselves so much on so many different things. Put cameras on 5th Street. There should be some type of cameras on 5th Street. The tree limbs are definitely overgrown. So when you pull it out of Bailey Road or Brookwood or whatever, I mean, the trees make it dark right there. It's just so much, like, I'm just not understanding how y'all doing. It's so just dysfunctional down there. People look out for who they want to look out for. People praise people for doing jobs that they're doing poorly. But then when it's somebody else, y'all ready to just cut their neck off. And I'm going to keep coming for y'all for that. Because y'all pick and choose who y'all want to protect. Y'all pick and choose who y'all want to protect as long as they're your friend and they stroking your ego or they got your back. Shout out to Kathy Galvin for writing a letter to the editor, naming things that Dr. Richardson did do, because the mayor won't give him credit for doing not a damn thing. She swear up and down the man ain't do nothing. Like she doing all this great work out here. You name 12 things that you've done, Mayor Walker. Name 12 things that you've done. Because all you do is take up for Chief Brackney. I got a FOIA request today where they wanted to discuss in closed session something about the state police getting the keys to those cars. We have yet to hear about that. We've yet to hear about that. I wrote an email to council wanting to know what happened to her for violating her code of conduct. And yes, it's a personnel issue, but y'all so transparent that you should have said something. You didn't have to cross the personnel line. But what happened to Chief Brackney for taking a picture in her uniform with political figures? What happened to her? Nothing. She can walk around there and do what she want to do. She can threaten the woman that works in the voter registration. She can threaten the IT people because she wants stuff done. She can do all this stuff and get back with it because she the mayor friend. So because she the mayor friend, her job protected. The mayor can send memos through the city manager's office because she want to send memos out. But then when the things get misconstrued to the public, we point blame at everybody. Yo, y'all are so freaking dysfunctional. For $500 almost for a FOIA request that you redacted damn near every single page. And then you still charge me $500. You redacted almost every page and you still charge me $500. Y'all are ridiculous. And y'all lucky that the media support the BS that y'all do and that they won't write the story right. But I'm gonna write my own story and I'm gonna expose every last one of y'all. And it's not a threat, it's a promise. Good night.
Thank you. So I just want to, because I was quiet the last time, it's not necessarily helpful to have people spreading untruths. So I've never sent a memo from the city manager's office. Again, I'll say, just like I said, when you have a Tea Party member and you in agreement, I'll say the same thing about you and Councilor Galvin being in agreement about something. I think that if you just pay a little bit of attention, that it'll be pretty clear that her gloating about, you know, in that opinion piece was pretty bogus, in my opinion, from what I know, and I'm here every day. In terms of, I wasn't praising the police department. What I stated was that in terms of looking at holistic solutions for the neighborhoods, making sure that we're not just putting them into a police state's continuous surveillance, that it was not healthy for the neighborhood and that we shouldn't be doing it. And it was alarming for me that the only people other than myself who was interested in ensuring that there were more holistic measures was Chief Brackney and Assistant Chief Mooney. So that's the statement that I made. And I think it would be very helpful just in terms of what the work that you have said that you were interested in, Ms. Hudson, and that you have been doing, is that you take, again, your personal feelings out of this and get the work done. I think that the leadership that you are advocating for, they are moved on, as you stated. They secured the bag. I hope that, you know, that you can focus your attention on getting back to the work that you deem to be so important, instead of attempting to find fault with issues that are just not there. So that's my, you know, comment there. Is just it's pretty tiring, but continue.
Mayor Walker, next up is Andy Orban. Andy, you're on the City Council.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for Mr. Duncan's presentation on Fifth Street. I did have a few additional thoughts. One is that, you know, we need to look a little more holistically about biking and pedestrian networks. You know, focusing solely on cars and congestions is kind of hiding the demand that we have for people wanting to use safe routes. Fifth Street Extended is not a safe place to walk or bike right now. And if we had better infrastructure, there's, you know, large areas residential just south of town that a lot of people could potentially bike into town from there. And the other point is we are also assuming that congestion will just be the same as it always has, but with COVID changing, work from home and things like that, we're also potentially looking at commuting patterns changing. And so we do have to think in a bigger picture, what environmental concerns and things like that we have to try to find ways to get people out of cars and to focus on just getting the most volume of cars through on a road is just long-term, not the best direction. So I'd really like to make sure we could keep focusing on ways to improve our biking and pedestrian infrastructure in town, even if it causes disruption of some of the commuting by car. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 additional hands raised. First, we'll go to Nancy Carpenter, who will be followed by Joan Albiston. Nancy, you're on with council.
Thank you and good evening. First of all, I want to say I commend you for the bold step in utilizing funds to hopefully give payments to some of the city employees that have been adversely affected by the pandemic. I just wish our federal government would take a page from your book and do something on a more national level to decrease this trauma that we're all going through. Secondly, I do agree Fifth Street sucks. As a road, and I do recall talking to an older member of this community who said that when they were younger, when that road was still 2 lanes, that particular curve where so many fatalities have happened used to have a nickname of death curve. I think lots of communities throughout, states and whatever have roads that have these, descriptors on them. And I don't think that whatever has been done to widen the road has, ameliorated any of that. And thirdly, I just wanted to say, I know you've got a big plate, lots of things going on, but please don't forget that the General Assembly enacted legislation this last time regarding PCRBs and additional powers that CRBs are not mandated to have, but are enabled to have. And I know that Mr. Payne will work hard with trying to get a work session together with the commission and council to decide how deep those new powers will go. I'm hoping that it's a 100% buy-in on all of the enabled powers that the GA gave us. And I know there's more work to do when they go back in January. And hopefully we can get together because in July 2021 is when the law changes, and would love to be able to have this all done and wrapped up and tidy for your June meeting so it can be enacted and, ready to go as we work under still the ordinance that was in November 2019. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Joan Albiston. Joan, you're on with council. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to repeat my request that the sight triangles at the intersection of Harris Road and Fifth Street be examined. There was no discussion about that this evening, and there would be more accidents if drivers did not avoid collisions there. I've started taking a tally of how many times I've had to come to a full stop in the middle of the intersection to allow someone to cross in front of me. I took a picture while my daughter was driving this afternoon, looking south at that intersection. If you look there, you see the guardrail. You don't see upcoming cars. I'm sure that the person who was hit coming out of Willoughby by the young man who was killed, who ran that red light during daylight hours in June, July, I'm sure that they would have stopped if they could have seen him coming. You can't see at that intersection. If you're going to improve that intersection, the visibility has to be improved. We have to have tools to drive defensively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, there are no other hands raised. Oh, we do have another one. Ms. Rose, you're back on with council. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I failed to ask this when I was talking the first time. You know, when you go down Fifth Street, you know, there's a pattern of trees going all the way down. And then when you, I know city and county council are different, but then when you get to the bridge going into the county, they don't have any trees up. Is there a reason why the city has to have so many trees lined up along that corridor, like the corridor, the straight stretch, to where, you know, the accidents are, you know, the young people are hitting trees and everything? Is there a reason why all the trees are lined up that way there?
Mr. Blair, is Mr. Duncan still on? Or is that something you need to get back and answer during your next city manager response to community?
I think it's something that I'd want to wait for the next city manager response. The one thing about that is we obviously, I know at your last meeting, I believe we talked about tree canopy, and that I do think there's probably going to be some interplay between traffic safety and the tree canopy issues that the council also is talking about. So we would need to do probably a little more interdepartmental analysis and work on that.
And I think that two of the accidents, one was, I think, the tree further up, but I can see the, you know, in that median area, there were two. So I can definitely see, you know, maybe the concerns there.
Then the only other thing was just around the site triangles, and I'm sorry that we neglected to raise that when Mr. Duncan was presenting earlier.
I'm still on if you'd like me to address.
Well, Brennan, before you do, I know Miss Rose is still on.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Duncan. Also, I was just curious to know about that because there seems to be, I drive that road on a daily basis. So I haven't counted the number of trees, but there are like right many trees. Is that really necessary? And I also think, with talking to Captain Durrett, he once mentioned to me that the trees were placed there maybe to keep southbound vehicles from crossing over to northbound to the other side, maybe. I don't know if the trees are placed there for that reason, so cars can't, you know, go over the median and go into oncoming traffic.
Yeah, I mean, trees in general are put in more for beautification and for the benefits of, you know, reducing temperature pavements, you know, from an environmental standpoint. And also it visually narrows the roadway. So if you didn't have those trees there, what already feels like a wide roadway would feel even wider. You know, those are kind of the two reasons that trees are put inside of a median like that. It's really not to prevent, you know, vehicles crossing over into oncoming traffic.
Have you driven down? Have you driven into Albemarle County over the bridge before, Mr. Duncan?
I have.
Do you see how when you cross that bridge, you might see like one little tree, but like the opening of that roadway is very wide, but you don't see any trees. Like you don't really have any fatalities down that end of the road, but I know city and county are two different things. But you kind of see where I'm going?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think there's just a trade-off in that you also probably have higher speeds south of the city as well. and, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, if you want me, I can respond to the sight distance triangle as well. Normally at signalized intersections, the sight distance triangles are not nearly as important, just because you're supposed to be controlled by the signal itself. And in many cases, one of the warrants for the signal is sight distance. So when you have reduced sight distance, you want the signal there to tell the driver when it is safe or not safe to go through that intersection. So I don't disagree that, having better sight distance there would be better, but I'm not exactly sure how to obtain it, in that particular location, either with the crest of the hill and some of the other factors there.
Thank you.
Because I think, is there the possibility of preventing the right turn on red at that intersection, or is that not legal?
No, we can do that, but similar to the slide I showed you with the backup, where if you start removing the right turn on red, you decrease the capacity of the intersection and will lead to further congestion there. So I would like to, before we would go that route, I'd like to try the flashing yellow and make sure that, see if that has any impact before we would take a step that would impact the capacity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I know I have, two close friend and a family member who lives in there, and that is usually from what I have, heard, from them, and one has lived there a very long time, that right on red turn, especially at, busy times, are, not part of the problem, because there's also the, trying to turn, I think, and go towards the like Wegmans and stuff, that may be an issue. And then, I've, to come out of, the Longwood direction, I have a aunt who lives over there, and I know that, she's been over there for years, and that trying to turn from that direction down on Fifth can be problematic too.
Yeah, one of the issues that had been brought up in the past that we tried to address was just the right turning vehicles out of Willoughby and the left turning vehicles from Harris. The left turning vehicles from Harris a lot of times would get into the outside lane and try and conflict with the right turning vehicle. So we did install some dashed markings through the intersection to try and keep those vehicles in that outside lane. But yeah, putting a no turn on red coming out of Willoughby is not necessarily off the table, but it's not something that I'd recommend at this time.
Okay. All right, Mr. Wheeler.
One more. Don Gathers, you're on the city council. You've got 3 minutes.
Excuse me. Good evening, council.
Good evening.
I appreciate you all taking up the banner of trying to solve this issue, because it's not only a fatality issue, but also an issue of non-fatal accidents that go on along that corridor. And dare I get in trouble with the tree commission, but possibly removing some of the trees might be the best solution, and adding in some old-fashioned gas lights. I don't know, 6-8 foot tall gas lights to help with the lighting along the way, and then that would help with the beautification along the corridor as well. As far as the potential congestion if we stop the right turn on red. Maybe a better solution would be to restrict the times that the turn is allowed. But obviously you're aware that something's got to be done, and I think that any and everyone would rather deal with the congestion than the continued accidents that we hear about so frequently in and along that corridor. So again, thank you all for taking it up and trying to find some viable solutions.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
No other hands.
All right, council, any other comments?
Thank you.
I wouldn't want to end before 10.
Why not?
It's a joke. All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.